Welcome to the CFBDynasty College Fantasy Football Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by WinLocal, digital marketing and web design for local businesses proven to help beat your competition. WinLocal.com.
Welcome back to the show here, the CFB Dynasty podcast with Brian and Zach on today. Today we're talking the off-season 2020 coaching changes, a recent piece released on the site by Zach Tao, and you can check it out and look at it in its entirety. We'll be talking about the main ones today and how they impact fantasy. But first, a little bit of news. We've had JT Daniels announce his transfer from USC to Georgia, and also the governor of Texas announced outdoor sporting events can host fans at 25% capacity beginning in June, which is good news because we still have a couple more months after that for that number to hopefully rise. How's it going, Zach? What do you think about the news?
I think it's great news, especially if you're a Georgia fan. We've got a good pipeline of quarterbacks for the next 2 or 3 years to look forward to. And obviously with Texas saying that fans will be allowed at the stadiums, albeit 25% capacity, like you said, maybe it'll go up by August.
Yeah, it's exciting and definitely a heck of a get for Georgia. It's the perfect offense for him, and he'll get a year with George Pickens, which could be really special. All right, well, let's get to it. So what do you think? Let's start with the man out at Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin. What are your thoughts on his transition from FAU back to the SEC?
I think it's a good move for him because, you go rewind back to when he got that job at Tennessee. I mean, we talked about this off air about how he got that job and he was just a little in over his head, I think. Yep. He was young. I believe he was the youngest coach in the SEC by a long shot, right?
Yeah.
And we don't ever doubt that he's a good coach. Like, I think everywhere he's been been touted as being a good coach, but being a head coach is a whole different ballgame at the collegiate level, especially in the SEC. So now, he went to Oakland, did all that. And then when he came to Alabama as the OC under Nick Saban, I think that's when he grew up, I guess is the best way to say it, because those Alabama offenses got completely transformed under Kiffin. And credit to Saban for letting him do it, because as much of a control freak as Saban is, that probably wasn't easy for him.
Yep.
But this is about Kiffin, not Saban. Going on a tangent, sorry. But then he goes to FAU and he has pretty good success there. The one thing that I did notice, though, as opposed to his years at Alabama where he had elite wide receiver talent, he always leans on his tight end. And I think that's good if you're looking for a sneaky kind of play at Ole Miss. Like, of course, they've got wide receivers, but some of these tight ends could be worth the watch.
Yep, I love that call out. And speaking of Kiffin at receiver, so one of the trends in fantasy over the years is that Kiffin-led offenses, dating back to him as the OC at USC, you can see he's got basically one or maybe two players that he likes to feature out at wideout. So like 2011, you're looking at Robert Woods with 111 receptions, 1,300 yards, 15 touchdowns. Marquise Lee, a freshman at the time, 73 catches, 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns. Huge in fantasy to have wide receivers that consistently see the ball coming their way, unlike Mike Leach offense, which we'll talk about in a moment. But 2012, Marquise Lee, 118 catches, 1,700 yards, 14 touchdowns. Robert Woods, another great year. And then you see that trend continue at Alabama, like you mentioned, Amari Cooper in 2014 with 124 catches, 1,700 yards, 16 touchdowns. 2015, you have Calvin Ridley as a freshman, 89 catches, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. So great for fantasy to have that kind of consistent production out of that wide receiver spot.
Yeah, it's funny, like, not that I forgot about USC, but it feels like it was so long ago that I didn't even think to bring it up. Like, I had most of those guys that you named from USC, I had on at least a couple of my teams. Marquise Lee probably carried me one season, maybe 2 seasons now, if I think about it. Like, but I think his evolution as a coach, too, though, if you go look at the Alabama stats again, like, yeah, he had the guys that were elite talents, again, Ridley, Cooper, but then you look kind of down, it was a little more spread out. And maybe that's just because he had more talent all around to work with. But then you fast forward to the Florida Atlantic numbers, there was really no dominant wide receiver in those years. The dominant wide receiver, especially last year, was a tight end, Harrison Bryant, who's now in the NFL. So,
and Devin Singletary obviously was a beast for him,
right?
Which proves that he will, and he's been a running back one guy there at FAU, whereas at USC he kind of spread it around at running back.
Right.
So we'll see.
I think he's evolved as a coach, but he's stuck to his principles, but he's kind of evolved with how teams are probably coaching against him.
Completely
I guess
agree.
That's probably the best way to look at it. And to the talent downgrade, too. He worked with what he had.
Yep, completely agree. And it'll be interesting this year, the SEC, with all the coaching additions and including the people that are already there, especially the West, is going to be so much fun to watch. Every game will be fun to watch. So for Kiffin, he's got a quarterback battle this offseason with Reese, Plumlee, and Corral. A feature running back, I think, in sophomore, Jerrion Ely. And then I'm really excited about the fantasy prospects of Elijah Moore. He's going to definitely be highly ranked in our receivers when the rankings come out in a couple weeks.
So according to the depth charts, which, by the way, you've been working on, you were telling me.
Yeah, we've got the SEC out. That's done. All of the Power Five's done. The AAC is done, and independents are done and updated. Through the most recent news that we have now, we'll certainly be tuned in to any news that comes out in the fall that we can get. So they're fluid, but yeah, we're still a work in progress.
Yeah, I see on your depth charts you have Chase Rogers as the tight end 1, Kenny Yeboah as 2. Those guys could be in play. Like I was saying, tight ends could be a sneaky play in this offense, especially if you're playing SEC only, or if you're playing very limited conference pools only, like we talked about last week. Maybe some people decide, you know what, I'm only going to play the Power 4 instead of the Pac-12 because they may not play. Stuff like that. Those guys like that could end up being really valuable at the end of the day. At the end of your season, you're like looking back on it, like, man, he probably won me a couple weeks.
Yes, definitely. All right, let's go to his Lane Kiffin's last opponent at home. He'll be playing against Mississippi State and Mike Leach, who made the jump over from the Pac-12. What are your expectations for how he'll do and that offense will fare in the SEC?
I think my expectations are not to make the expectations too high, I guess, is kind of where I'm at. Like, I think he has the potential to take that team 9-10 wins. Maybe not this season, but it's a team, like we were talking about before, how it's not a team that you can just prepare for in a week, especially if you don't ever see it. It's kind of like an option team. The air raid is something that if you know it's on the schedule, you're probably going to practice against it back in the fall camp, and you may not see it again until you play him. So I feel like he could catch anybody on any given week, and he's going to have some big wins there, like he did at Wazoo. So I'm excited about it because I think he brings that wild card factor to the SEC. But I think my expectation is probably 8-4.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. He's got, in my mind, one major thing working against him and one thing working for him. On the positive side, you have, Alabama, who recently opened up their offense. LSU, the same thing, which with that sped up tempo, it creates more problems for the defense, and I think the SEC is more open to the wide open attack now. It's less shocking though, so there will be a lot of teams preparing for it. But yeah, his system is just different, but it's a system which takes some time, and they didn't get spring practice, so that kind of puts them behind the 8 ball compared to some of these offenses that are going to be staying the same.
To his credit, though, the key to the system is a quarterback, right?
Yep.
And he went and got one.
Yep.
Through Gaten Costello. So I think receivers are kind of still – you don't really know what to expect. But in a Mike Leach offense, the guys you have listed on the depth chart today may not even be top 3 come November. So,
and he's got the beast at running back, Kylan Hill, he's an NFL prospect, came back for his senior year.
So are we looking at Kylan Hill like we did Max Borghi last year?
Oof, great question.
I mean, you have to, right?
Yeah, he's gonna catch more balls, and I feel like there's gonna be some sort of a transition period where they do run him a lot because seemingly is the clear strength of the offense.
Right. And that's tough because when you have a huge philosophical shift as you have with Mike Leach coming in, it's going to be hard to transition in 1 year. But the good thing is they always have talent. It's just you don't know what they really have because, like we said, they could have a receiver sitting in there 5-6 deep that turns out to be the best one, and he's going to find that guy, and he's going to give him the ball. So, I just feel like I love the coaching hire of Leach because it's just such a wild card. That's the best way I can put it.
It is a wild card. KJ Costello, I've seen him ranked really high by some of the CFF guys out there with rankings. Where do you see him falling, coming in, competing in the SEC?
Where do I think he will be, finish, ranked, or where do I think
in terms of fantasy? Yeah, where would you draft him? Would he be a quarterback 1 or maybe a QB2 kind of guy? Well, obviously, all these Mike Leach guys have been.
I think if you
extremely
take
productive.
Him high, I don't know if he's a top 10 quarterback. He potentially could be, just because the system alone kind of dictates that. But we've never seen it in the SEC. Let's just face it, it's kind of a gimmicky offense. So to see it in the SEC will be interesting because, he could put up Burrow-like numbers. Yeah. I mean, he could. But at the same time, he could also not. And it could be really ugly. So I don't really know. If I'm drafting him, I'm probably drafting another quarterback soon after.
Agreed, 100%. And the big reason to me is that there's clear chunks of when you can play him based on their schedule. So they open with New Mexico, then they travel to NC State, then Arkansas, then Tulane. Those are fine, startable for sure. And then A&M bye week at Alabama, at LSU, and then Auburn, which I wouldn't say he's unstartable. Like a Mike Leach offense and against a up-tempo battle potentially at Alabama, maybe you would start him. Probably not. But then the latter half of the year, as you're going into the fantasy playoffs, they play Missouri, at Kentucky, Alabama A&M, at Ole Miss. Definitely startable there.
That's the thing. I think you're going to see those first 4 or 5 games, you're going to really kind of get a read on what he's going to be. Because if he doesn't light it up in those first 4 or 5 games, you can't expect him to light it up in those 3 juggernauts that they're going to play right in the middle.
Totally agree. So,
like I said, if I'm drafting him, I don't know where he's actually projected to go. I've actually done no mock drafts as of now. I feel kind of terrible that I haven't.
You should.
But like, I don't know where he's going. But if I considered him, I may have taken a quarterback already, and he would just be a luxury pick. Like, look, I'm going to roll the dice with him, and if he hits, great. If he doesn't, I do have somebody else already kind of ready to go.
Yep.
In Dynasty, though, the thing about the Dynasty aspect of it, though, is do you go for Costello? If you're doing a startup, are you even looking at Costello, or are you looking down the pipeline of other guys that will come up in that system?
Oh, for me, I'm waiting because I know he's going to want to bring in his guy. I'll look for them to bring in another transfer and a recruit that he likes. I would wait if it was me on a dynasty league.
So if you were drafting Costello and you had, let's say, you had to start 2 quarterbacks, and in the, let's say, 5th, 6th round, he's still there. Are you taking him?
In a 2 quarterback league as a QB2 for sure. Yeah, I would take him.
Yeah.
I like that.
I think he's
I like
borderline.
that value.
Quarter 1 and 2. Like, I think if he's your lead dog at quarterback, man, you better hope he's good.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know you could say that about just about anybody, but I think the uncertainty of this system transitioning to the SEC makes it a little harder than normal to just say, oh yeah, they're just going to plug and play and he's going to throw the ball 60 times a game.
Yeah, and with that middle chunk of the schedule, I'm cautious. I like him as a QB2. If you're getting him in round 6, that's fine.
Right.
If he falls that far, but
I don't even know where he's been going. That may have been just a dumb thing for me to say. Like, he might be going round 3. Like, of course he's not going to be there in round 6. But
yeah.
I don't know.
Depends on the draft.
I just feel like I wouldn't reach for him. That's probably the best way I can put it. I would not reach for him.
Agreed. It's exciting to have a Leach quarterback, but
yeah,
he simplifies everything and will make it easy. But yeah, not having a spring makes it a little bit tougher.
Oh yeah, that doesn't help either. And one more quick thing before we move on, like I know I talked about like how Kiffin kind of adjusted and adapted his offense. I don't expect Mike Leach to do that.
No.
No, I'm just saying, like, it's not as drastically as maybe Kiffin did.
Yep.
But does he have to? Doesn't he kind of have to a little bit? Especially when you have a running back as talented as Kylan Hill is.
He's got to. Kylan Hill's a special running back. And honestly, I'm surprised he's not more highly thought of in the mock drafts for next year and this past year if he were to go pro, because I think he's a special running back and tough to bring down. But yeah,
Yep.
We'll see. I think you're right. I think he's got to shift the style a little bit this year while he's got Kylan Hill.
I think it's a good guy to have when you're transitioning. But let's move on.
It's a good point. Yeah, sure. All right, let's move over to the ACC and talk some Florida State football here with Mike Norvell coming over with Kenny Dillingham, bringing his offensive coordinator over from Memphis, where they had one of the best rushing attacks in college football, certainly, but obviously really well known for years for running backs at Memphis.
Yeah, definitely. I was telling you this earlier too. Like, you know, I'm born and raised in Memphis. I'm not a Memphis fan, but I've seen the evolution of Memphis Tigers football. It went from being they might win 2 games to now they're expecting to lose no more than 2 games. So it's drastically different. Now you can thank Fuente before Norvell for that shift, but Norvell kept it going and even took it a step further. And when you look at the numbers that they're putting up, not just running backs, go look at some of the receivers numbers that they've got. Like, it's kind of ridiculous, the numbers that they're putting up. Like Anthony Miller, that 1,400 yards, was that 3 years ago? That was huge. And then you look at Coatsy from last year. Like, I remember last year I wanted to grab him in my league, and I thought, man, there's no way he's gonna, nobody's gonna grab him, right? Like, as high as I was planning on getting him. And then somebody took him, and I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Like, so it wasn't as big of a secret as I apparently thought, but I just think that offense is so explosive, and because they couldn't stop anybody.
Yep. And
I mean, especially in 2018, that's the reason they couldn't beat UCF. They just couldn't stop them.
Yep.
I mean, but the UCF couldn't stop them either. That was kind of the thing. So now he goes to Florida State, where, I would say the talent is significantly better, but I'm not so sure that it is, especially on that offensive line.
Oh, the O-line has been a mess. Yeah.
So, of course, their skilled players are probably higher ranked recruiting-wise. Fair enough, right?
Yeah.
But they're replacing Cam Akers at running back. They've got talent there, but they're still unproven.
Well, Laybourne was his really good, super fast running back who had an injury. And then you had Jashawn Corbin, who came over from Texas A&M. I don't think we're sure if he's eligible or not yet.
Yes. He's been granted a waiver.
Yep. Okay. So he's eligible. Like, the running backs for Florida State are legit.
On paper.
Can the O-line do it is the problem.
That's on paper, that sounds great. But like you said, offensive line, if they don't repair that offensive line, it's not going to matter.
Yep.
As bad as they were. And I was shocked that Boise State went down there and beat them last year.
Start the year, yeah. Week 1.
To start the season. Like, especially with a freshman quarterback that nobody really knew. He was highly recruited, fair enough. But to go into Tallahassee, when that game was supposed to be neutral site, by the way, and the offensive line isn't what kept them in that game. I guess it was the skilled players that they had. But like, they didn't really show up throughout the year. Like, it was just kind of like Cam Akers was so highly recruited that you'd have thought he was a Heisman candidate every year. He should have been.
Yep.
And with an offensive line, he probably would have been. Right?
He definitely would have been.
He still rushed for almost 1,200 yards last year, which is not a little amount.
And the O-line, like we've said, was terrible. I love the talent that they've got coming back. Tamorian Terry at receiver, and Wilson and DJ Matthews.
So I'm kind of like contradicting myself a little bit, but it's more of I want to see, can that offensive line just be okay?
Yep.
And if they're okay, I don't think they'll have a problem putting up points.
And I feel like they should in the ACC. You've got Clemson, who's got a great defense annually. Who else do you have that's consistently great? And I don't think it's there. I think we've been waiting on Florida State or Miami or Virginia Tech or somebody to come up and be that second dog.
Virginia's trying to be, but I don't think they're good. Bronco Mendenhall's doing a good job up there. But
so Norvell will definitely be watching Florida State and that running attack, and obviously Blackman's back. He's taken a beating throughout his career, and luckily he's put on some weight, and he's got a great deep threat in Tamorian Terry. But Can the O-line protect? We'll see. That's going to be the biggest thing for Norvell and them to have some success that makes fantasy owners take notice. And how will, let's say the O-line's good, how will they split up Laybourne and Corbin? Because they're both really talented and have shown it at the college level. So we'll see. We'll see there.
Yeah. We need to get a couple more in because we need to kind of wrap things up here soon. But, Florida State, I think that if they don't see an improvement soon, that fan base is going to lose their mind if they haven't already. Because Clemson's the only team in the ACC that we know is the top 5 team pretty much every year.
Yep.
Or even close to a top 5 team every year.
Yep.
So, like you said earlier, that it's just ready for somebody to take that step and challenge for the ACC. So,
all right,
maybe they can be the team. But
we'll do a little rapid fire here for the last few to talk about. Those were the main head coaches there. Todd Graham is interesting to me. We'll see. He's out at Hawaii. He had a couple years off from Arizona State, but most notably from a fantasy perspective, he was the head coach back in those high-power 2007, 2008 Tulsa offenses, where he had Paul Smith in 2007, 5,000 yards passing, 47 touchdowns, and then in 2008, David Johnson with 4,000 yards passing and 46 touchdowns. So receivers, running backs were great in those offenses, but quarterback was the prime one. And he's got, I hope I say the name right, Cordero, Siobhan Cordero, coming back at quarterback this year. So really interesting get from a fantasy perspective. I really like Cordero if you can land him as a quarterback too. Any thoughts on you for Graham?
Oh, that's definitely a very intriguing hire for Hawaii because, they lost Rolovich, who went and replaced Leach at Washington State. So the run and shoot was they kind of kept the run and shoot, but kind of didn't. Graham, like you said, back in those days of Paul Johnson, all those guys, right? Like those guys were fantasy, like cornerstones, the best word I can use. Like if you had that guy, you were probably going to go to the playoffs. Like regardless who else was on your team, you were probably going to the playoffs. And you probably made it to the championship game. But another quarterback that he had was G.J. Kinney in 2009, who was another fantasy stud. Now, maybe not as big of a stud as the years past, but he still was. And he happens to be the offensive coordinator at Hawaii under Graham. So that should be interesting. That offense, they should be on the same page with the offense.
Yeah,
if nothing else.
It's interesting. I heavily invested in Tulsa back then in fantasy. So going from the David Johnson days to G.J. Kinney, he was more of that dual threat style quarterback.
Yeah.
So we'll see kind of how that offense evolves. But I really like Cordero. He can do both, in my opinion, especially in the conference that they're in there.
Right. I agree too. And a name, we're doing a little rapid fire. He's not a head coach, but offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, Tommy Reese. How do you feel about him?
Reese is going to be interesting. Notre Dame, I really am interested to see what happens at quarterback. I was surprised at how many points Ian Book put up per game last year. Looking back at the data, he had about 31 fantasy points per game in your standard league, and that's pretty solid. And they've got star power behind him. So if you're looking in dynasty leagues, Notre Dame is definitely going to be a spot to look for. You're just kind of waiting for them to break out and have a year where they can run the table, but they're just not quite there, but certainly relevant in fantasy.
All right, another one that we talked about pre-recording this was and you said it was a boring hire, was Dave Aranda at Baylor. Now, one we didn't talk about, and I just thought about it, is they hired Larry Fedora as their offensive coordinator.
Yep.
So maybe that's not as boring as we think it is.
It's true.
And that could be something that they haven't had in a few years. Like, go back to the high-flying Baylor offenses again. Maybe Aranda gives him full control of, look, you're the offensive coordinator, make it happen.
Yep.
And I would assume that he would, because he's a defensive guy.
Yep.
So I would assume that Fedora's going to, the more I think about it, that Baylor, that could be a very sneaky good team.
They have the returning
Fantasy-wise.
talent for sure.
Yeah.
Really like Tyquan Thornton, and running backs are solid. And, of course, the returning quarterback. So, yeah, I mean, with Fedora there, it'll be interesting. You were talking before the pod about coaches that are just better as coordinators. Fedora, it might be the ideal spot for him.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many guys that it's almost like they feel like they have to take that step to be a head coach. And maybe they do. Maybe they need to be have a reality check, put in their place. Like, look, you're a great offensive mind, but head coach is not for you, And
Yep.
I think, not that Fedora is a bad coach. I don't want to put that on him, but I think he's really more acknowledged as a great offensive coordinator, even before he took the North Carolina job. That's what his calling card was. So I think there's a lot of guys that are like that.
One of our biggest mistakes, or one of the things we had wrong last year, was buying in completely on Scott Frost in Nebraska and Adrian Martinez at quarterback, who I still like, and I feel like he and Scott Frost will get it right. They've got a new offensive coordinator this year, Mike Levick, who coached with Scott Frost at Oregon.
Yeah, that's, if anything, you want to see, everyone wants to see the Oregon offense, the high-flying Ducks offense in Lincoln, right? That's what we want as fantasy gold. That's what we want. So hopefully they can put it all together, and I think that he's trying to get a formula that's worked for him before.
One of my favorite moments of the college football season last year was watching Nebraska play against Ohio State. They were in that game for a little bit, and they got that old school option offense to work in a couple series, and it was so much fun to watch there in Lincoln. But yeah, we'll see how that goes this year. Mike Yurcich, new OC at Texas, will be something interesting to watch there. He's been over at Oklahoma State for a while as the OC, and then was at Ohio State last year. Should be seamless with Ellinger.
You would think, and Texas is looking for anything at this point to be. No, I mean, seriously, they want to win the Big 12. I mean, they want to win every game, but they want to win the Big 12, and they've got a quarterback they can do it with. So I think it's reasonable to say that they could win the Big 12.
Yep.
I don't think that's out of the question. I mean, Texas should compete for it every year, but as we see, they haven't. So I'm pretty optimistic about them.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got Jimmy Lake taking over, head coach at Washington, fully a defensive background. They lose Jacob Eason, so it's kind of a complete, going to be a different year for Washington Huskies. I'm not really sure what to expect from them at this point.
Well, the good thing is he may have a whole year to figure it out, because the Pac-12 may not play. I mean, so I'm not trying to be funny, but it's reality, because look, Chris Peterson anointed him as the head coach.
Yep.
You know, like it was like, look, I'm stepping down, but this is the guy you need to hire. Like, so he championed for him to be the head coach. So I think if you think Chris Peterson is a great coach and you trust that he knows what he's doing, then I think you have to give Lake a pretty good chance to be a good coach. And it sucks because he's a defensive-minded coach, and we're more looking for high-flying stats and fantasy stuff. But
yeah,
who's to say he can't? Who's to say he can't bring in, you know, an offensive coordinator that's just – and he did. He brought in John Donovan, but that's like an old relationship that they've had. So
speaking of Chris Peterson, he and Urban Meyer will be guys that certainly will be coveted as hot seats become hotter and hotter. Probably
that's interesting because I don't know. Like Chris Peterson, that was just kind of out of the blue.
Yep.
Nobody expected that. Washington didn't even expect that. So I don't know. I don't know that he coaches anytime soon. Maybe he doesn't ever coach again. But there's going to be a team, like there always had been, even when he was at Boise State. Like, they always called. He didn't always take it, but they always called. So the worst thing he can say is no.
Yep.
So, again, it could be a big program that, like, they lose a coach to retirement, or he just moves on and decides he doesn't want to coach anymore, and they need a high-profile coach to step in. Who better, really, right?
Yeah.
But
totally
I know that's a little
agree.
Off the beaten path,
but yeah, maybe this segment next year. But yeah. So I mean, a few others to note. You've got, you know, Joe Moorhead over as the OC at Oregon. Greg Schiano back at Rutgers. Maybe he'll make them have a pulse again.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be interesting to see some of these different coaches and how they react without a spring ball to help them prepare. But yeah, that's something we'll be monitoring for the rankings and things and that's what we'll probably have launched fully with the full set of rankings, over 1,000 players ranked within the next 2 to 3 weeks, and available to our members. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up for me. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I mean, other than the ones you've mentioned, I mean, you got a couple more that I maybe watch. Is you got Rhett Lashley as an OC at Miami. They need anything, some kind of spark down there.
And De'Aaron King to work with too, yeah.
Right, and then you got Mike Bobo at South Carolina as their offensive coordinator. How does he change their offense? Something to kind of think about. But other than that, we kind of mentioned everybody else. Oh, I guess another one, Monken at Georgia.
Yep.
That could be pretty big, especially like we talked about JT Daniels coming in. But again, we could talk about all these guys. We could spend another 3 hours if we wanted to. So I think we need to let people go and make the judgments for themselves on all these moves. But
yep.
You can go check that out on the site.
Yep, and these certainly impact our rankings as we're looking at trends for coaches and how they've done in previous spots. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these coaches perform. But yeah, we'll wrap it up there, and we'll be back with more for you guys next week. So thanks for listening in. Take care, Zach. Thanks.
Later.